I feel the cold wind of tyranny.
I do.
Call me paranoid if you will, but I think it's part of perpetuating the myth that there was ever anything dangerous out there.
And after that whole process, I just thought, this stinks.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining me again on GBN Originals. A headline that caught my eye this week reads, COVID criminals dragged through courts 5 years later. Okay? In summary, 5 years after the first lockdown, people are still being dragged through the courts in this country of the United Kingdom of Great Britain for breaching COVID rules. So with that topic in mind, I thought who better to chew the fat with than my friend and GBN colleague, Bev Turner. Bev, lovely to see you.
Thanks for having me, Neil. You know I like talking about this topic because I still think it's sort of therapeutic for a lot of us. No, not least the people in these stories, because I wasn't aware of this until you sent it to me. I was not aware that 5 years later there are still families being dragged through the courts because of the nonsense of the what should, let's face it, have been temporary at best measures.
They're not even being hauled through the court for things that, by any estimate, could have been looked at objectively and seen to be, deliberate, provocative flouting of rules. Getting up in the face of police officers. It's down to people taking the wrong sort of PCR test. It's the minutiae of it. The story was actually it was in the Telegraph in the UK, and 130 people appeared before court hearings related to alleged COVID breaches in the past 6 months. And there's all sorts, but there's an example of an American woman, Dodie Wexler, 55. She lives in London. She's born in America, but was living in London, had been for a quarter of a century with her kids. In December 2020, she and her sons, teenagers, took the opportunity to go back to the States to catch up with family. And they got stuck behind another lockdown in the UK. But when the restrictions lifted, they came back to the UK after first taking the trouble, all 4 of them, to take PCR tests. They got negative tests and they travelled with them. But when they encountered the border controls in the UK, it turned out they had taken the wrong sort. I'm not even, because I wasn't really testing, I wasn't really aware of the variations on the theme of PCR tests, but it turns out you can take the wrong PCR test. It's not just enough to take a test. Now, she was fined at over £1,000 in the end. The whole thing dragged out. Lots of exchanges of letters. It was processed through the courts. She made an appeal saying that she really didn't have the money.
Yeah. All
sorts of pleas went on. It wasn't until November 2024. And remember, this kicked off for her in 2021. In 2024, her fine was reduced to £400, and she said it was traumatising and she'd been made to feel like a criminal. Just to hone in on that one human being's experience, how do you feel on learning that she and so many others are still being hauled over the coals?
You know what? When I hear the story like that, and also her testimony was so powerful because she said, she wasn't saying this is BS, which is what I would love to stand up in court and say. She was saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford the thousands of pounds you're asking me to pay. And that's just so heartbreaking because what you have there is a woman of good character, of, probably a nice person, a rule follower. If that had been you and me ended up in court, Neil, I literally would have gone to prison over the principle of the insanity of that period of time. And if they'd been dragging it out to this point, then I definitely would have gone to prison. And I think by now I'd probably have the majority of people on my side. I understand why back in 2021, she might have been seen as a figure of kind of public danger because there was so much of the psyop still going on at that time. But these people now must feel so isolated because the world has moved on. And we work with journalists, you and I, and we meet people and people in the media just want to move on now. They don't want to look at what happened. They just want to move on to let's just forget all that. Let's just forget all that. Let's all move on. Let's nobody take responsibility. Let's not talk about who made money out of that. Let's not talk about the corruption. Let's not talk about the role that the mainstream media played in all of that and the government. These people are still living it alone outside. Now the noise has died down. I find that I find it really sad. I find it really heartbreaking. It makes me incredibly full of empathy for these people. And I sort of just want to go and crowdfund for the likes of these people that are still dealing with it, because I think there would be people lining up now to say, I will help you pay that bill if you can't pay it, because this is so wrong that it still lands on the doorstep of individuals who did nothing wrong.
What are we supposed to get from this? How are we supposed to read the messaging and the signalling that must obviously come with the way in which we understand these people are being dealt with? You know, on the one hand, you talk absolutely accurately about the appetite that there is out there. I don't really feel it, but there's an appetite out there to move on, to put it all behind us. And the COVID inquiries, which don't seem to be doing anything like apportion any blame, demand any consequences, any pledges of nothing like it ever happening again. Not at all. The huge players like the Pfizers and the Modernas and the rest, you know, that were so involved in producing the medical interventions and so on, nothing happening to them. But why doesn't the supposed appetite to put it all behind us extend to throwing out all of those cases that are still outstanding? Why isn't that tiny, petty minutiae of it all being set aside along with everything else that happened?
Because I think it's about that sort of place where the bigger picture collides with the individual. And what I mean by that is there will be individuals in the cases that have ended up in court and are still in court. There are individuals who are still benefiting. And that means lawyers, solicitors, maybe police officers that want to put a file to bed. And all it takes is enough little people lined up together, getting some sort of convergence of benefits. We've talked about this, you and I, before, to mean that this momentum carries on. And I mean, in this case, for these individual people's lives. And on a macro level, of course, that was pretty much driving the whole of that scamdemic time in history. Pantodemic is a new one I've heard recently. I quite like that. These big operations, these huge global events don't happen without enough individuals who are prepared to buy into it, turn a blind eye, or do the wrong thing. And that's what I think explains to some extent why these people are still in trouble with the law and are still living with this. On a deeper scale, on a more kind of ideological level and a nudge kind of perspective, you read these stories in the papers now online, and you still will come away from it, unless you very much are in our sort of mindset now, you will still be developing a fear of the state. You'll be developing a fear of stepping outside your line. If these people are still being challenged and being punished 4 or 5 years later, then, you know, what mustn't I do today in 2025? What line do I need to tread? And it very cleverly feeds into this metastasizing mindset of be good, do what the state tell you, do what the police tell you. We've seen it as well with, you know, the online ridiculous things like that family that had the police at their door because they'd written something on a school WhatsApp group. Be quiet, be silent, be obedient, actually, is the messaging that you take from this. And, you know, this idea that the whole of the pandemic may have been some sort of global test to work out what the public would accept in terms of control. Well, these people almost look like continuing test cases in a way. Are they still going to buckle under the pressure of the judiciary in this country? And then where does that take us? You know, what do you think?
to me, it's part of, call me paranoid if you will, but I think it's part of perpetuating the myth that there was ever anything dangerous out there. I'm very sceptical about the way in which there's been a pivot towards, oh yes, it was definitely a lab leak. I don't think there was anything new out there, but whether or not there was, what matters to me is what was done in the name of it. Whether it was a real thing or not, it's the lengths that they went to and the steps that they took, the freedoms that they stole, the businesses they destroyed, the lives they destroyed, and all of the rest of it. And I think going so far as to persecute, a mother because she travelled with her teenage sons using the wrong PCR tests is continuing to underscore, it was terribly dangerous and you took a terrible risk.
It is interesting. I was watching a clip, actually, I put it on Twitter. It's an interview that I did on This Morning, one of those shows in 2021, when I was talking about the fact that the vaccine passports was a trial ground for whether we would accept a digital ID. And I put that on Twitter because yesterday in the papers on Britain's Newsroom on GB News, we're doing a big story there about Tony Blair pushing out digital ID. And I have this weird experience where it's like a sort of cross time. I kind of have to go back. And then I think, how funny that back in 2021, I could see this coming in 2025. What was that about? And so in that respect, in terms of playing into that narrative, these cases of people still being prosecuted are required in order to keep that narrative alive, that there is danger. There's danger, whether it's someone coming across on a dinghy, that you need to have a digital ID, a biometric stamped on them as soon as they put a foot on the sand, which, let's face it, will never happen. Even if they bring in digital ID, it won't be those people that will get it. It will be you and I. And so I'm still very much aware of those reverberations happening around the world, and very much aware that journey, that direction of travel has not really deviated. I've seen several sort of breaks in that, what was looking like a continuous chain. I have seen several junctions where actually things have stuttered. And the reaction actually this week to this digital ID has been fascinating on GB News, because so many more people are now awake to what that would mean than they were back in 2020, 21, 22 even. So I do have sort of faith, actually, that a lot of people have, thanks to, you, other people, thanks to the noise that some of us have been making, that there is a greater awareness of individual liberties and the role of the digital media in all of this, the role of the mainstream media, the role of politicians. I think there is sort of like a kind of big awakening going on, Neil.
They call it, one of the terms I've liked recently is the great noticing. There's a lot of great things out there, great resets and all the rest of it, but great awakening, but now great noticing. And I find that quite helpful, because I think a lot of people, rather than awakening sounds a bit abrupt. Yeah. Just a gentle noticing, a hang on, just a general hang on. But to broaden this out, I wonder, Bev, at the extent to which you feel that you still live in a society in which the law is equally applied. We're familiar with, on top of, the courts, Lady Justice with her blindfold, because she's supposed to mete out justice regardless of who it is that's the focus. When we see people being, jailed for social media comments, while with violent criminals being let out of jail to make space for those kinds of convictions. And as I say, massive transnational corporates walking away from the COVID scamdemic scot-free, while individuals are fined hundreds or thousands of pounds, and more importantly, put through years of stress of the ongoing proceedings. Do you feel that we live in a lawful society where the law is the same for you and me and everyone else? I don't know if you remember, well, I came on your show at the time when I was involved in the judicial review for vaccinating the under 18s. So along with a team of lawyers and pathologists, Claire Clegg, Francis Horse, Stephen Jackson, and we formed a group and called for a judicial review, Sajid Javid.
and the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority in this country, to justify what was the rationality behind rolling out a new drug to the under 18s for a virus for which they were at zero statistical risk. And when we embarked on that process in what would have been, I guess, 2022, I absolutely had faith in our legal system. And then I sat in the court. I could not believe my eyes, because the judge effectively said, I can't make a decision on this. I'm not a medical expert. I trust the medics. And if Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance say this is what we should do, then I absolutely trust them. And I sort of couldn't believe my ears, because there was no incentive, there was no inclination, motivation to look at vested interest, to look at whether they had shares in certain drug companies that might be persuading them. We had a particular hearing with the Office of National Statistics, a representative from there who wouldn't even give us the information that we required. And that information was, is there a statistically significant correlation between the date of COVID injection and the date of death? I think it was between men between the ages of 15 and 24. And all we wanted was date of injection in a young man, date of death. That's all we wanted on the discovery process. And the barrister from the ONS stood up in her wig and she said, we will not, yes, she said, there is a statistically significant correlation, but we will not give you this information. And the judge said, quite right, quite right. And their logic was, you might be able to identify who the people are, and those people deserve medical privacy. I mean, you know, the irony of being asked, have you had a vaccine? Have you had a vaccine? When medical privacy had apparently gone out the window. And we said, we don't need names. We don't need location. We don't need anything. We just want an age, date of jab, date of death. And they said, we will not give you that information. And that was it. So we couldn't pursue. We couldn't proceed with it at that time because they wouldn't give us that. And after that whole process, I just thought, this stinks. Because I was convinced you could only, in the absence of rationality, right, in the absence of logic, you have to look for other reasons. And all I could think was, that judge gets down off that stand. He goes to his private members club around the corner. He has a bottle of port and a plate of cheese, probably with one of the MPs who's covering his own backside here. Because there can be no other explanation as to why you're just not interested in exposing the death of young people. And so from that moment onwards, I've been much more sceptical about the legal system in this country. So in a way, none of this sort of surprises me anymore. And then you think about people having knock on their door, like our mutual friend Bernie Spofforth, who ended up in trouble because she posted something about the Southport riots, was prefacing it with, if this is true, all hell is going to break loose, which was about whether the perpetrator was an illegal migrant, whether the perpetrator was known to the intelligence services, etc., etc. A very innocuous tweet to some extent. And got put in prison for 2 days, got put in jail, at the police station, in a cell, for as long as they could hold her, for 48 hours. As long as they could hold her. And again, I thought, oh, come on. This can't. In the absence of logic, you have to look for motive. And the motive can only be to put a shot across her bows, to say, be quiet, be silent, don't give us your controversial opinion. And that, unfortunately, breeds a culture where you have a tyranny of silence, doesn't it? It's really, it's one of the things I feel most strongly about pushing back against, is this idea that free speech is going to be lost.
You've invoked the T word there, tyranny. The idea that the devil is in the details is partly why my attention was caught by the people continuing to be prosecuted for COVID breaches. Because to me, it's in the way that every man, every woman is being treated that's the thing that you have to keep your eye on. and you're right to mention as well, to bring up what happened to Bernie Spofford, because I think that she was in that, as it were, Goldilocks zone. She was just well known enough. She had just enough of a profile, but not enough that she had the protection that a higher level of profile might confer in the same circumstances. She was just right.
Yeah. She was no
for them
Nigel
to go
Farage.
after.
For instance, they wouldn't have done it to Nigel.
She was not too hot, not too cold. She was just right. They thought, right, great, here's one. Doesn't matter who she is, doesn't really matter what she's done, but she's the right sort of person. We can nail this person as a, pour encourager les autres and all that. And I think you've got to watch. Yes, you watch what doesn't happen to the Pfizers and the Modernas and the senior scientists and the senior politicians, but it's when you watch what happens to every man quietly, out of sight, really. That, I mean, to me, do you feel? I feel the cold wind of tyranny in what happens to somebody like that mother and her teenage sons. That's where I feel tyranny coming in.
It is the cold wind of tyranny, but again, my earlier point, it relies on an army of bullies. It relies on enough weak police officers, weak social workers, all these individuals with their own issues that they bring to the party, wanting to have a little bit of power for a day. Remember during the COVID times, the absolute, I won't even swear, even though we're not even on the telly, the awful human beings that suddenly had power beyond their wildest imaginations. And I don't think it's gone away in customer service, by the way. I don't think it ever went away in, you get some gobby little blooming shop assistant in Zara telling me to stand on a yellow circle. I'm like, I'm not standing on your yellow circle. You'll stand on that yellow circle. No, get lost. I won't stand on a yellow circle. Oh, you will. I'm like, you probably haven't even finished your A-levels. Who do you think you are? Not standing on your yellow circle. And these people, unfortunately, they were tripping off this power that they had and they were exercising. And some of them just have never gone back. And I'm not talking about know your place. I don't mean that. I don't want to sound like some bloody elitist knobhead. But there is a certain mindset of a British value, which is probably be summed up by like, you do you, hon, I'll do me. That's become one of my favourite phrases of the last 5 years, because I don't mind what anybody does in the privacy of their own home. I don't care whether you wear a dress and you've got a willy. I don't care who you sleep with. I don't care what you do. But when you then start to impose for the greater good, for your safety, for your well-being, you start patronising to me and telling me how I have to behave because you tell me to do so. And that's what this lawfare mentality, this lawfare depends on, is enough people doffing their caps and tugging their forelocks to the powers that be, so that we're all scared to say what we think. Once we are self-censoring, Neil, we are already in a tyranny.
It's so interesting to me when you describe that. I'm presuming that is something that actually happened to you in Zara. I don't know, but even if it's hypothetical, but because we've all had that, we all had that, and it also back again to these people being prosecuted. It's the witch hunt. Yeah, we all, whatever you do, you learn about the Salem witch trials. Yeah. In the 17th century, in literature or in fact or whatever, and you're supposed to learn lessons about the pernicious danger of the witch hunt, whatever you're calling a witch. But the way in which that behaviour you're describing, and you see it when someone gets flagged up in the media spotlight as being a wrong'un, and it's the witch hunt. Due process goes out the window, and it's just the witch hunt. There's a target. There's someone that we can all gather around and set on fire or stone, metaphorically or literally. And the persecution of the individuals in these COVID breach travesties is the same thing. It's perpetuating that appetite, I would say, that's out there in part of society, that people really love to set aside their daily lives and have a bit of power. over someone made vulnerable by the attention focused on them by the state. And that's another reason why they won't let it drop in the case of these people that did something like use the wrong PCR test or went against the flow of the magic arrows in the supermarket.
Yeah.
It's because it keeps blowing oxygen over those coals.
And let's not forget,
it's that appetite.
Let's not forget how many people loved that period of time. How many people loved 2020 onwards? Hey, listen, for 2 weeks, sat in the garden drinking rosé in the sunshine. I bloody loved it as well. I mean, the novelty wore off quite quickly, I can't lie. But I said to my kids the other day, we're driving to school, and I said to my teenagers something about, well, you know, if there was another lockdown. And she went, oh, I'd love another lockdown. And she went, oh, as long as you're not talking about COVID all the time, Mummy. But, you know, you got to, that's how it worked, is because it was bloody brilliant for so many people. They got paid to stay at home and don't do a job that they hated and not have to do anything, not have to drive the kids to swimming club, not have to drive the kids to school. Like, it just fostered this lazy inertia with that millions and millions of people in the country who just would never been happier. But some of us were going, oh, okay, this is all lovely. The government have printed £500 billion. Just you wait and see how expensive your groceries are going to be in 2025. Just wait and see what happens when the oil prices go through the roof and your gas is turned back on again when everyone comes out of lockdown. Just you wait. But it was that lack of imagination, lack of vision. Nobody could see what was going on around the corner. No compound thinking. I'm just in the moment. Yay, I'm drinking my rosé in the garden, making sourdough bread. It's brilliant. Kids, look at me on Instagram. Isn't it fantastic? Let's let's have a Zoom call and drink wine. Like, you're all mad. None of you can see what is coming around the corner. And then these individuals that we're talking about, these people who are still in court, who are like the trailing end, the victims, that there are still victims of that period of time. 5 years later, I wonder how long they will be. Like, when will they get through the courts with all these people? How many people will keep appealing and appealing and appealing and appealing? This could go on for years. And I suppose, as you would say, if it does, then it serves a purpose to keep the narrative alive.
It's like when you walk across, the analogy I would use is like if you walk across the battlefields of the Western Front in France to this day, you still bend down and pick up spent bullets.
Yeah.
They will never, all that ordnance, all that heat, all that detonation for 4 years between 14 and 18, you still walk it and they'll always be finding it. There will always be another body being found in a hedgerow from 1914. There'll always be another button. And you know, to torture that analogy, I would say that in 5 years' time, there'll still be somebody being burnt at the stake for having, you know, not followed the magic arrows in Tesco's between 2020 and 2022. It'll never go away because the appetite is there for it. So I feel that it always was and still is and always will be about the people in control of the creation and flow of money. And the next thing I think will be a more obviously financial crisis. But what do you think?
I think that clearly the debt, the global debt, was so hot, and that situation is clearly unsustainable. And therefore it is logical that those who own a lot of the wealth in the world would like to have some sort of reset that would enable them to get more money and for the likes of us to have less. I like, it makes sense that this fiat currency system is dying, is dead. Then Trump brought in tariffs and wiped 20% off the stock exchange this week. And I thought, well, that doesn't really work, because what he's effectively done, my limited understanding from my A-level economics, is...
You've got A-level economics?
I did A-level economics, don't know that about me. I got an A. I don't. Believe me, there's nothing I don't know about the economy in the 1990s. Things have moved on a bit. So 94% of stock in America is owned by 8% of the people. So my heart is not really bleeding for billionaires lamenting the fact that they've lost 20% of their money. And that's what I've seen happen. And then I go, well, hang on a minute. If Trump is genuinely going to reindustrialize America, bring back what we might call proper jobs, rewarding jobs, I mean, not being a TikToker, right, but having an actual job, working in industry, which we might have considered boring once upon a time and a bit dangerous or whatever. But in these days of health and safety, I think there are some people that would really, really love to go back to a time when you have a proper job, when you work in a factory and you make something and you have this sense of purpose and you go home at the end of the day and your boss isn't on email asking you to do something. Like, I think there's a hunger now for proper jobs to be back again. And so if he is going to reindustrialize America and he's literally taken from the billionaires, which means that there's going to have to be an interest rate decrease, I think, at some point. Inflation's going to come down. Everyone's shopping is going to be cheaper. Farmers in America are going to be incentivized now. They're going to have to sell their produce to American people rather than shipping it overseas. Then I see that balance moving in what we might term the right direction. We've had the biggest transfer of wealth in history during the pandemic. You know, we talked about this. We've created more billionaires than any other time in history. And I think Trump has just given a shot across their bows. And that gives me faith. But I'm probably missing something.
No, I don't think so, because I listened to you use Trump and genuine in the same sentence, and it was discordant for me. I'm not sure.
You're not feeling it, are you?
I'm not feeling it. I was skeptical.
Neil.
I was skeptical. I mean, I enjoyed the kerfuffle of Trump emerging and Trump triumphing over Kamala Harris. I enjoyed all of that. You know, there was a schadenfreude about it. But no, I don't really think that deep down where it matters, that anything has happened. I don't think it would have been enormously different, really. Whoever had won.
Really?
Not really. No, not down where it matters. I don't. But I didn't get an A
My
in
worry
economics.
is that he hasn't got enough time. That's my worry. But I hope you're wrong. But my worry is that he hasn't got enough time in this one term, unless he can hand the baton to JD Vance. And they will carry on with this movement. They seem authentic to me.
Why does the President for Peace, which is how he campaigned, why is he still facilitating the explosions in the Middle East? Why? Because that will come back. Because no one, peace. The peacetime, the peaceful campaigner always wins the U.S. election. You always win on that ticket. But war making presidents always fail. I mean, it's almost a cast iron rule. And yet, despite the fact that he said he was going to finish the war in Ukraine and with a couple of phone calls, and he was going to bring peace, the world's as bellicose as ever, and we're saber rattling for war with Iran.
This is true.
Making America great again, employing American people, reinvigorating American industry. I'm all for that, but I think where it really matters, which is blood and guts, I don't think it's made any difference whether it was Trump in the White House or anybody else.
You don't think he's got closer in terms of ceasefires in the Middle East and in Ukraine? He's surely closer than we were at any point under Biden.
Well, I remain to be persuaded.
You're right. He didn't end them in 2 phone calls like he said he was going to do. And yeah, I mean, for me, that is still, I guess that is a test. But maybe you just can't. Maybe you can be outside of the deep state, but still not able to end those wars.
If the president can't, then what's the point in being president?
I was really happy when I came on this interview, Neil. I'm really sad now.
Well, on that note, it's been like being on the analyst's couch. I myself feel psychologically eased by having aired all of these thoughts with you. So, Bev Turner, we'll do it again soon.